What's up, guys? What is up? Good morning, everybody. You know, over the past 5 days, I've been talking about my 5 favorite flipping baits, my top 5 list. What I want to do right now is I want to go over each of the baits we talked about over the past 5 days, kind of talk a little bit about how I rig these baits, the different type of covers that I prefer to fish these baits in, basically. Now, before we get started, I want to explain one thing to you. This is my 5 favorite baits to flip with. It is the way I rig these baits is the way I like to fish them. By no means am I saying that if you rig these baits a different way or have success fishing these baits another way than I do, by no means am I saying that's wrong. Everybody has their own confident way of rigging a certain bait or throwing a certain bait or using a certain bait. What works for you might not work for me and vice versa. So this is my favorite ways to rig these baits. If you rig them a different way than I do, I'm not saying that it's wrong, it's right for you. But anyway, let's get started real quick. Number 5 on my list was the Mac Daddy Craw by Bruiser Bait. Now, the Mac Daddy Craw was basically, most of the design of this bait was by Bruiser Bait Pro, a friend of mine, and also a Lake Okeechobee flipping icon, Brandon McMillan. Hence the Mac Daddy. Okay, Mac Daddy Craw. Now, the way I rig this bait when I am flipping it is, of course, anytime I'm flipping a soft plastic, I always rig my flipping baits Texas style. Okay. I like to flip this bait with an offset shank wide gap hook. Now, I find myself that I have a better hook set to catch ratio with using a wide gap versus the standard typical straight shank hook. That's my success rate, is I have better success with the hook set on a wide gap. So most of my soft plastics I'm gonna be using a wide gap hook. But I rig it Texas style. Now I have a lot of people always ask me, when I'm flipping, do I peg my weight or do I not peg my weight? Quick simple answer to that is, anytime you're flipping, you always want to peg your weight. And the reason behind that is, when your bait enters the water and you flip in whatever type of cover you're fishing in, if you don't have that weight pegged, what's going to happen is the bait's going to hit the surface, the weight's going to end up dropping to the bottom, the cover or the grass or whatever you're flipping at the time is going to hold that bait towards the surface. It's not going to allow the bait to drop, but your weight will drop to the bottom. By pegging the weight, your bait is going to hit the cover, hit the water, hit the surface, and it's going to drop to the bottom in one compact unit, which that's what you want when you're flipping. Okay, so yeah, definitely peg your weight. Now, a quick little side note, I like to use the flat out tungsten or the flat out pro pegs. I use the football style pro pegs on most of my baits that I throw. So anyway, a little bit of a side note, you can get them in Bass Addiction gear as well. But anyway, the Mac Daddy Craw, I pretty much could flip this bait in any type of cover. The only thing I do not use this bait when I'm flipping is when I'm punching mats or when I'm punching floating vegetation, when I'm having to punch through something real thick. And I'll get into that in a second. Okay, number 4 on my list was the intruder. Okay, now I rig the intruder two different ways. I will rig it just basically with the bait itself. Again, um, uh, the intruder now, I have this one actually rigged with a Trocar straight shank hook. And I'll get into the reason for that in a second as well. But again, a pegged nose weight, flat out tungsten weight. Okay. Now the other way I rig this is, and when I use this bait, I use it a lot for punching. Punching floating vegetation, punching mats, basically. And the reason I like this bait to punch with, it's a streamlined, thin profile bait. Getting back to the Mac Daddy, the reason I don't like punching the Mac Daddy or the Avenger, I don't typically punch anything that's going to have appendages on it that could get hung up in the vegetation easily, basically. When I'm punching, I like a streamlined bait, something that when it hits the surface of the mat and the weight punches through, there's nothing on that bait like a large claw, similar to like your Avenger has, that is going to restrict its fall through the mat. So it's a streamlined bait, great for punching. Again, flat out tungsten weight, pegged. Now, I do use a straight shank hook when I am punching. The reason for that is, again, it's all about a compact type of bait that's going to fall through the mat or fall through the vegetation with no restriction. Your straight shank hook allows it to have a little bit of a more, with the hook and bait together, and more of a compact. With a wide gap, you're going to have the wide gap that kind of sticks out a little bit further on the bait itself. So I use a straight shank hook when I'm punching mats. That's usually the only time I'm going to use a straight shank is when I'm punching. When I just randomly flip a vegetation, buggy whips, bulrush, cattail, spatter dog, pat. Anytime I flip it other than punching, I'm going to use an offset shank wide gap. But anyway, that's the intruder, guys. Now I use the intruder two different ways. I will use it just the bait itself, with the flat out tungsten weight, or if I want to give it more of a jig type profile. Now here's the thing with jigs. There's not a lot of jigs on the market that you could actually punch with. Reason being is the jig's a bulkier bait. Okay, it's hard to get the jig to drop through the top of the mat. So what you do is flat out tungsten has what they call a weighted punch weight for a skirt. It's a weighted punch skirt as well. So it actually is designed. Here we go. Here's what the. Let me see if I can zoom this camera in a little bit and kind of give you a little bit closer look. This is flat out tungsten punch weight. Now, I don't know if you can see that or not too good in the camera, but anyway, it allows you to be able to put the skirt on the back side of this weight, and when you rig it, you put whatever soft plastic you want on. Of course, I use the intruder on mine when I'm punching. But it gives it more of a jig look without a jig, which with the weighted punch, the punch weight basically with the skirt, it'll drop down through the top of the mat. Typically, a lot easier than if you're going to try to punch a jig itself. Okay. Alright, let's move on to the next. Number 3 on my list was the Avenger. And again, the Avenger, I basically pegged nose weight, wide gap offset shank hook. But I love flipping this bait when I'm sight fishing. During the spring time of the year when the fish are moving in, spawning. If I'm sight fishing, it makes a great sight fishing bait to punch around as well, or to flip around as well. But you can use this bait year round and catch fish. Now, here's another thing too. When do I use braided line and when do I like to flip with mono? Now, me growing up in South Florida, pretty much when you're flipping down there, you're flipping a lot of, most of the time you're flipping heavier grass, heavier vegetation. You will never see me not flipping in Florida, not having braid on. I'm always going to have braid on my reel when I'm flipping in Florida. And there's a couple different reasons for that, but the main reason is when you get on a fish in Florida, you want to get her up. You want to get her out of the stuff as quick as possible. Get her up to the surface as quick as you can. The braid helps to allow you to do that. Mono has way too much stretch. You're not going to be able to get on them as quick as you need to, especially when you have an 8-9 pounder on the other side of the line. Which anytime you fish in Florida, you always have an opportunity to be flipping up 8-9 pounders. Every time you go out, you have that chance. So you always want to be ready. But braid in Florida when you're flipping, the other reason for that is if you're flipping thicker cover, like if you're flipping bonnets, basically, real thick bonnets, and you make a flip 10 foot from the boat, and you set the hook on a big fish. If she decides she wants to run to the left, basically, well, your line is going to be where you set the hook on that fish. And that fish all of a sudden wants to take off to the left. Usually there's no stopping that fish. She's going to go where she wants to go. Okay, when she takes off to the left, with braid, you can keep your line tight on that fish. As that braid darts to the left, that braid's basically going to be able to saw and cut its way through all the vegetation, still being able to keep tight on that fish as she's running sideways. With monofilament, you don't have that luxury. Monofilament, your line basically will be going down to where you set the hook. That fish decides she wants to run left on you. Now your line's going to be going where you set the hook at the fish. That fish is going to go left. She's still going to go left. Your line's not going to follow her. I don't care how tight of a line you keep. Now all that fish needs to do is make a slight little change in direction. You're going to get some slack line because you're not going to be able to keep that line tight on her when it's going there and the fish is over here. So that's another reason in Florida when you're fishing that really heavier grass, cover, bulrush, buggy whips, bonnets, whatever you're fishing, you want to use braid. Now if I'm outside the state of Florida, just for example, if I'm fishing wood or if I'm fishing laydowns or anything like that, I like to use like a 17-pound monofilament. I don't usually like to use braid in them situations. And the reason being is when I set the hook on a fish and just for example a laydown and I pin her against the wood, okay? With braid, a lot of times if you pin the fish against the wood, she could actually get that hook ripped out of her before you're able to get into her. Because of the no stretch factor, the solid feel of the braid, there's not that much give in the line where if you pin her, especially on a hook set, if she's pinned on the hook set, you could rip that hook out of her very easily. Where fishing monofilament, you can still be able to set the hook on the fish, get the hook penetrating the fish. If you pin her in the wood, you just basically keep the line tight on her, and it gives you ample time to be able to go in with the boat and get the fish before that fish rips that hook out of her with the no stretch factor of the braid. So monofilament when I'm fishing wood, timber, anything like that. But anyway, alright, moving right along, that's the Avenger. Second on my list was the 5-inch stick bait, or 5-inch stick worm. Now, just like the big version, the 6-inch stick, the 6-inch big stick, the 5-inch stick worm is basically a scaled down version. Here's the thing, and you don't see a lot of people fishing do nothing type baits or stick type worms. You don't see a lot of people flipping them, but I'll tell you one thing. These baits right here make the best flipping baits that you could use, and there's a few different reasons for that. The main reason is the shape of the bait. You could actually flip this in a lot thicker cover with a lighter weight and the bait will be able to hit the surface and still be able to go down because there's no appendages, there's nothing on this bait that's going to restrict it from falling. So you could actually fish these baits with a little bit lighter weight than, say, the Avenger or the Mac Daddy, and still have the bait be able to go down to the bottom in one compact unit. Now that's one of the reasons I really love fishing these baits, is there's pretty much nothing you can't flip these baits in and have them go down through to the... Alright, let's go to my number one on the list, which is the 6-inch Big Stick. And just like the 5-inch stick worm, the shape of this bait will allow you to be able to flip this bait in most anything. With a little bit smaller weight than you'd be able to flip, say, other soft plastics that have appendages coming off of it because of the shape of it. Once it hits the surface, once it goes down, it's going to drop straight through because of the way this bait's shaped. And that's one of the main reasons I love to flip this bait, is there's not much you can't flip this bait in and allow it to be able to go down, go through, go down to the bottom. Typically, you could use a little bit smaller weight with this bait because of the shape of it. You don't have to beef the weight up so much to get it to drop through. But this is my number one flipping bait, my favorite flipping bait, the bait I have more confidence in than flipping anything else. But now, how do I determine what weight size I want to use for whatever bait I'm fishing? Now, I have a theory when it comes to figuring out your weight size. I want to use the smallest weight I could get away with fishing for the thickness of cover that I'm flipping. And basically what that means is simply, I use the smallest weight I can, which will still allow it to be able to carry that bait through whatever cover I'm fishing and carry it down to the bottom. I'll give you an example. If I'm fishing thick bonnets, chances are you're not going to be able to get the bait to drop through with the line hanging over the top of the bonnets. You're not going to be able to get it to drop to the bottom if you're fishing it with like a 3/8 ounce weight. You might need to beef up to a 1/2 ounce to be able to get it to drop through. So the smallest weight you can get away with for the thickness of cover that you're fishing. I like using smaller weights. Now there's one exception to that rule, and the exception is extreme tough conditions. For an example, and this pertains to Florida more so than out of Florida, cold fronts. Cold fronts will affect the way a bass bites, the way a bass reacts to a bait more in Florida than it will outside the state of Florida. Cold fronts seem to affect the bass a lot more there because they're not quite used to the colder water, colder temperature drops, colder swings in temperature that you get in Florida than you get, as you go further north. But cold frontal conditions, you hear everybody always talk about anytime the bite gets extremely tough, downsize your bait, which that's true. You want to make that bait dropping in front of the fish look like an easier meal, an easier target for that fish to get. A bass, when the conditions are extremely tough, doesn't want to work hard for the meal. So you downsize your bait, make it look like it's an easier target for the fish. But what a lot of people don't talk about when they downsize the bait, automatically they think downsizing your bait, they got to put a little bit smaller weight on because you're putting a little bit smaller bait on. When you downsize your bait during extreme tough conditions, you want to upsize your weight. The reason for that is, a lot of people don't realize this also, flipping is a reaction bite. And 95% of the fish, especially the bigger fish that you're going to catch flipping, you're going to get bit on the way down before the bait hits the bottom. And when you're flipping at targets. You're having a vision before you make that flip where that bass is laying, and you're trying to put that bait on top of where you think a bass is before you even make that flip. So when the bait drops in front of the fish, all the fish is basically going to do is, as it's dropping by, the fish sees it drop by her, and she sucks it. That's why a lot of the bigger fish, when you get bit, you never feel the bite. because you drop that bait right in front of the fish basically just reacts to the bait dropping in front of her. And you never feel that bite. You lift up on your rod tip and you just feel weight. But you got to be careful, because if you feel weight and you don't know if you're hung or not, if it's a little bit different type of a feel, typically it's going to be more of a spongy type of a sensation. You want to be setting the hook, because that basically means there's a fish that ate the bait on the way down before you even know it. You never feel the bite. You just lift up on your rod tip. You feel that little bit of a difference. You basically want to set the hook before she feels you, because if she feels you first, it's too late. But anyway, flipping's more of a reaction bite anyway. So when the conditions get extremely tough, the bite gets tough, extreme cold frontal conditions, when you have to fish really, really slow, really methodical to get that bite, because they don't really want to chase the bait. They don't want to eat. You have to go more for a reaction. You downsize your bait, make it a little bit more compact, a little bit easier looking target for the fish, but upsize the weight. You want that bait to fall faster in front of that fish. Even though it's a smaller bait, you want to go more. There's more than ever you want to go for that reaction bite when the bite's tough. So, if you drop the bait in front of a fish and that bait kind of drops slow and subtle, fish isn't going to react to that. Fish is just going to lie there and look at it go past her. But if you take a bait and drop it quickly in front of that fish is going to react to that quick drop before it hits the bottom as it goes by, or it's going to be dropping quick. That fish is going to suck it in as it goes by. Reaction bite, okay? Beef your weight up when the bite gets tough, when you downsize your bait. You want to upsize your weight. Okay, now, let's talk one more thing. Experimentation. I'm always taking an already made bait. I'll sit back at my desk and I'll take some baits and I'll look at them and I'll see what could I do differently to try to see if I could try something different that maybe the fish ain't never seen before. I want you to take a look at this for a second. I want to show you something. Let me find it here. Take a look at the wacky worm. This is a couple different pages I made up, different ways you could rig the big stick. But anyway, I want you to just look at this wacky worm right here. Okay? I want to know who the guy is that ever came up with the wacky worm. I mean, you got to think about it for a second. This is the dumbest looking setup you've ever seen, the wacky worm, right? Now, I could just picture what was going through this guy's mind the first time the wacky worm was ever used. Whoever ever came up with the wacky worm, he probably said to himself, I'm going to take this worm, I'm going to hook it right through the middle, and I'm going to use the squid presentation and try to catch a bass. Granted, a bass has never seen a squid in his life, and I'm going to catch fish like this. The wacky worm is a good example for somebody having an idea on how to rig a bait and an experiment. Okay, I guarantee you the first time that wacky rig was ever tried, whoever came up with the wacky rig, it was an idea, and then he took that idea and went and experimented with that idea. Okay? It's the dumbest looking bait you'd ever seen, but now 95% of fishermen use the wacky rig as part of their arsenal. Okay? It's one of the most popular baits out there right now is the wacky rig. Okay? So that kind of just gives you a little bit of an idea. Don't be afraid to try stuff. Don't be afraid to experiment with baits. Try to if you have an idea on what you could do to change a bait up a little bit, make it a little bit different, something possibly the fish has never seen before, do it. It doesn't hurt nothing. All it does is cost you time to get out there and experiment with different stuff. So, fishing is. Let me put it to you this way. Every bait on the market today was all started with an idea and an experiment. I don't care what it is or how long it's been around. It originally started with somebody's idea on, I wonder if that'll work. They take it to the lake and put that idea to the test and go out and experiment with it. So don't be afraid to try stuff. Don't be afraid to experiment. Let's talk a little bit about my rod, my reel, my flipping stick, the reel I like to use. I use PowerCore custom rods. Now, let me talk a little bit about a couple of the advantages of buying a custom rod versus going into bait and tackle shop and buying a rod already built off the shelf. Alright, if y'all notice when I'm on the water, I'm typically hold my rod a little bit different than most people hold their rods. I actually hold it above the reel seat, and there's a reason for that we'll get into in a second. But by getting a custom rod, they actually put a foregrip on my rods for me. Which typically you're not going to have a foregrip on a lot of better rods when you go to bait and tackle shop and buy your rod. Typically the blank goes right into the reel seat. Well, yeah, I have a thinner wrist. I have a little bit weaker wrist than probably most men out there. And not embarrassed to say it, my wrist is a thinner wrist. Okay, so I have to grip my rod a little bit different. The conventional way to grip a rod is basically on the trigger right above and below your reel. That's the conventional way to hold a rod. Problem I'm going to have if I hold the rod conventionally is with my thinner wrist, with my weaker wrist, if I set up on a big fish, what she's going to do instantly, she's going to just bow my wrist over because I don't have leverage holding the rod here. I have absolutely no leverage on that fish. She'll bow my rod over or bow my wrist over in a heartbeat, which I won't get a good hook set on the fish. So I have to actually hold my rod in front of the reel seat to get better leverage on the fish, so she doesn't bow my wrist over. Okay, with PowerCore rods, they actually add a foregrip onto my rods, so I can hold the rod a lot more comfortably than just having to hang onto the blank. Okay, so basically and they'll build that foregrip whatever size I need the foregrip as well for my grip. So that's one of the things with a custom rod like PowerCore is you can have them build it the way you need it for your comfort zone. The other thing is, you could have them build the handle the length you need it. Some fishermen like a shorter handle, some fishermen like a longer handle. They'll build it the way you want your rod built. It's going to be your rod forever, so build it the way you want your rod built. And here's the thing with a custom built rod too. You're not going to pay, in most cases, any more money having a rod, unless you have it really blinged out fancy. It's not really going to cost you any more money than going in the bait and tackle shop and buying a rod off the shelf. But you could actually have it built the way you need the rod built. So you're not going to be spending a lot of extra money doing it that way. But for your comfort level, you're going to have a rod that you're going to be comfortable using because you had to build it the way you need it built. The other thing is with PowerCore rods, the grips. They use a couple different grips. They use a wind grip, which my signature series flipping stick, which is this here, they have a wind grip on it. Which the thing with a wind grip is a wind grip is so much lighter than cork and so much lighter than foam. Of course, cork is the heaviest type of a grip you can get on a rod. And a lot of rods are actually built with cork. Even a lot of the rods that actually wrap them with your golf club type grip, you never know, but it's cork underneath it. It adds a lot of weight to that rod. The wind grip, lighter, but it's more durable because it's going to look nicer a lot longer. The one thing with cork is it doesn't last that long as far as its appearance. 6 months using a cork grip, and just from gripping the cork, it's going to be dirty. It's going to be nasty. It's going to get grooved out. All right, you're not going to get that with the wind grip. And your foam as well. You use a foam grip for 6 months, it's going to be dirty. It's going to be nasty, and it's a type of dirt nastiness that you really can't clean. You can't make it look nice again. You don't get that with the wind grip, and the carbon grip as well. You're not going to get that. It's going to be a very light grip. It's going to make this rod extremely light. At the end of the day, you're not going to feel it in your forearms, where you take a rod that's built with like a cork grip or that going to be a little bit heavier rod. You're going to be feeling it up here at the end of the day after using it all day. These rods are extremely light. One of the reasons that they're extremely light is because of the grips they're using in them. The microwave guide system that they're using, it's actually called a microwave air ringless guide system. And what that does, it allows you to have get further distance out of your casting, and it also is going to give you better accuracy. The way the microwave guide system works is basically when it comes off your reel, it flattens out at the first guide, and it basically flattens out all the way up through your rod tips, so you're not going to have any resistance as the line's traveling through your guides. You know, less resistance as the line travels through your guides in turn is going to give you longer casting distance, and it's also going to give you better casting accuracy, and in this case flipping, it's going to give you smoother line coming off your rod tip, which is also going to give you better accuracy when you're flipping. And when you're flipping, it's all about accuracy. You want to be able to put that bait where you want to put it, where you think that fish is laying. So accuracy is key when you're flipping. Okay. Other than that, guys, that is about it. That wraps it up. You know, I hope you can take a little bit of what we talked about today, and it helps you with your flipping. You know, if you could take one little thing, what we discussed, and take it and be able to utilize it when you're on the water to help you. You know, I've done my day's work. And another thing also, don't hesitate if anybody has any questions. Never hesitate to message me. I typically try to get back to everybody within 24 hours, but I'll try to answer any questions anybody might have. Feel free to message me anytime. If I don't know or don't have the answer to it, I'll definitely find out and try to get the right information for you. So guys, I appreciate it. Tight lines. Everything we talked about here today, you can find them on the website, Bruiser Baits website, www.bruiserbait.com or bruiserbaits.com, bassaddictiongear.com, and also powercorrods.com. Guys, you need to check out Power Core Rods also. You know, check them out, go to the website. You know, I'll tell you one more thing also about Power Core Rods, custom built rod. When you buy a rod for the bait and tackle shop, that rod, before it was built, it was touched by 15 or 20 people on an assembly line as that rod's being built. When you go to Power Core Rods, you're talking to one man, Warren Page, the owner of Power Core Rods. He's the only man that's going to be touching your rod when it's built. It has the personal touch put in that rod when it's being built. So powercorrods.com, guys, check them out. Alright, tight lines, and we will see everybody on the water. Talk soon.